I flinched as the faint sound of breaking glass broke the nighttime stillness. A heavy feeling came into my chest as I turned to look back the way I'd come, toward a street lined with large, widely spaced houses. I was on a tree-lined walking path in a small park at the end of a street in an upper-income neighborhood. It was late, nearing 10 o'clock, because I couldn't stand to take my therapy walks when people were around. I preferred to be alone on my walks. Now, my ever-present, low-grade paranoia was going into full swing with the sound of the breaking glass. I felt I would be accused of something. I had a record, after all. I hadn't even been out of jail for a year yet. The looming houses seemed accusatory in their sullen silence. Although none of the windows faced me directly, I still felt that they were staring eyes, watching the interloper in their fancy neighborhood. I peered toward a nearby house, which was separated from the park by the stone wall that encompassed the public space. That was where the sound of shattering glass had come from. A faint squeak sounded from that direction. I looked closer. A blonde woman in fancy-looking lingerie ran out from the property. She was running strangely, with her hands held behind her back. And she was the one squeaking, I realized. As she ran into the street in front of the park, I saw that her mouth was taped over. She was screaming against the tape. That was the squeaking noise. She looked around wildly as she ran, her bare feet slapping the rough asphalt. I stared, dumbfounded. My long-ingrained instincts told me to mind my own business, while common sense said otherwise. The woman ran toward the house across the street, but she turned her head and saw me when she was halfway there. She changed direction, her muffled screams growing louder as she ran toward me. I moved toward her, stepping off the path and into the shadow of a large oak tree. But I froze when I saw a man emerge behind her. His face was deformed by half-healed scars, one on his forehead and one on his right cheek. He wore white coveralls with the hood cinched tight at his chin, and he carried a large, serrated knife in his gloved right hand as he sprinted after the woman. I stepped behind the oak tree, heart pounding as cowardice and self-preservation fought with my sense of justice and humanity. He didn't see me, I told myself, listening to the woman's muffled screams. Unable to help myself, I peeked around the tree just in time to see the man close in on her, slicing the knife down onto her back. The woman spasmed and tried to jerk away, tripping in the process. With her hands bound behind her back, she hit the grass hard on her right shoulder and rolled into a face-down position. The man jumped on top of her, landing on her hips to pin her down. His horrid face was unmoving, stuck in a sneering expression that some part of me recognized as a mask. It was nothing more than a realistic Halloween mask. As he raised the knife to plunge it into her back, he paused and lifted his head to look toward me. I yanked my head back behind the tree. My breathing tightened in my throat as sickening fear took hold. I waited for my mind to choose between fight and flight, hoping it would choose the latter. But nothing happened. I stayed glued to the spot behind the tree. The soles of my shoes stuck to the grass. My hands clutched the rough bark of the trunk. It seems the choice had been made for me. Freeze. I half expected the killer to step smoothly around the tree and plunge his knife into me with all the confidence in the world, like it wasn't a big deal to take another human's life. But he never appeared. No matter how much my twisted guts felt like I'd already been stabbed, I remained unharmed. I lost track of time for what could have been anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes. Somewhere during that interval, I realized that I could no longer hear the woman's muffled screams.
No shit,
I thought in a voice that was strangely like my father's.
She's dead. He killed her while you cowered behind a tree like a child.
Finally regaining control of my body, I grabbed at my pocket for my phone. Of course, I didn't have it on me. My court-appointed therapist forbade me from taking my phone on my nighttime walks. She said it would defeat the purpose if I could stare at my phone the whole time. After taking a deep breath, I leaned out and looked toward the killer and his victim, but they were gone. The park was completely empty. So was the street. After peering around for several long moments, I eased out from behind the tree. Moving tentatively at first, I soon found myself hustling toward the wall that separated the park from the house. I pressed up against the wall and worked my way to its edge, sticking only my head out and looking toward the house. Everything seemed normal. Much like the other houses in the neighborhood, this new colonial sat like a bunker of wealth against a chaotic world. Everything was in its place. I saw no sign of broken glass in the yard and no streaks of blood on the driveway, which was next to the wall. Turning back around, I checked for streaks of blood on the walkway. There was nothing. I moved across the park to the other side of the street, stepping onto the sidewalk and trying to walk casually, not looking at the house in question. Soon, I couldn't stand it anymore. I broke into a run, bolting back to my cousin's house, where I'd been staying for the last 3 months. Out of breath by the time I barged through the back door, I hurried toward the living room, where my cousin Grant was watching his nightly dose of Netflix. Grant, older than me by 5 years, turned to look at me with an annoyed look on his smooth, tanned face.
Call the police,
I said, rounding the couch in the spacious living room, reaching for my phone on the coffee table.
What did you do?
Grant asked. Although I heard the words, I didn't infer their true meaning. Not then. I was too concerned, too frightened, too racked with guilt to consider what my cousin really thought about me.
There's a killer,
I said, dialing 911 with shaky hands.
He killed her.
Grant paused his movie and stood up.
What? Who?
I ignored him, putting the phone to my ear.
911, what is your emergency?
I rode in the back of a squad car down the street to the park. It had been nearly an hour since I'd called 911, and the cop now driving had come to Grant's house about 5 minutes ago to ask me some questions.
We haven't found any evidence of a crime,
he said as we stood on the front porch of Grant's house.
Why don't you come down and walk us through exactly what you saw?
We came to a stop behind another squad car in front of the new colonial house.
That the house?
The cop asked.
Yeah,
I said.
But like I told you already, I didn't actually see them come out of it. I just heard the window breaking and then saw the woman come running around that wall.
I pointed at the wall.
And then the man came after her while you hid behind a tree.
I swallowed.
Yeah, that's right. What tree?
I leaned forward and pointed at the tree, which was just visible from where we were parked. The cop looked in the rearview mirror and then twisted around in his seat to see where I was pointing. He looked out the windshield and nodded.
Okay.
His radio squawked.
Anchetta, we're coming out now. You ready?
Copy.
Anchetta said into his radio. Then he looked back at me in the rearview.
Okay, Mr. Menard. I want you to look at the house and tell me if you recognize the people who come out with my colleagues.
I nodded and looked out the window to my right. After a moment, the front door opened and 2 police officers, a man and a woman, stepped out. A middle-aged couple dressed in nightwear escorted the 2 officers onto the porch. They were speaking, but I couldn't hear them from where I was. It looked like the cops were apologizing, given their body language.
That the woman?
Anchetta asked.
No,
I said.
I told you. She was blonde.
The woman now standing at the front door was clearly a redhead.
What about the man?
I looked at him, trying to glean any similarities.
I can't say. He had a mask on and white coveralls, like the kind scientists wear, or crime scene techs. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Menard.
Although he said the words, his tone implied anything but thanks. The couple retreated inside, and the cops walked down to the parked squad cars.
Let's take a walk,
Anchetta said, stepping out and opening the opposite door for me, so I had to scoot across the cramped back seat. As I stepped out into the night, I glanced back toward the house. The man was at a front window, peering out through a cracked curtain. He stared at me the way I always imagined people in those great big houses would stare at me. Like I didn't belong. Like he was plotting, scheming, hatching ways to punish me for invading his well-to-do neighborhood. I shook the thought off. remembering what my therapist said about such thinking. 10 minutes later, after I had walked them through everything, we headed back to the cars. I could tell that the cops didn't believe me. They had no reason to. There was no evidence.
I don't know what to tell you, Mr. Menard.
Anchetta said.
Without a victim, we don't have a crime.
Did you search the whole house?
I asked with desperation.
Yes,
the female cop answered. Her name tag said Salter.
They were gracious enough to let us search everywhere. There was nothing in there. No sign of a struggle. What about the broken window?
I asked.
Did you look around the outside of the house? No broken window,
Salter said.
No bits of glass, nothing.
I shook my head.
I don't understand. I saw it. I saw it.
We reached the squad cars and were standing around. The cops shared a look with each other. Anchetta sighed and looked at me.
You have a history of mental illness, do you not? Is it possible?
I've never seen things,
I said.
I've never hallucinated anything, much less a murder. What?
Okay, Mr. Menard. I'm just trying to do my job here. We're not accusing you of anything.
I peered around at the other houses.
What about other witnesses?
I asked.
Did you talk to anyone else?
No one saw anything, Mr. Menard, Salter said with a bored look on her face.
Just you did.
I dragged a hand down my face and looked at the ground.
I'll take you home,
Anchetta said. When I arrived back at Grant's place, my cousin greeted me inside the front door, arms crossed. Behind me, the sound of Anchetta driving away faded, soon overtaken by the soft rustle of leaves and the once peaceful silence of the neighborhood. Now, at least for me, that silence held promises of horrible things.
What was one of the conditions for you staying here?
Grant asked as I closed the door.
I'm not causing trouble,
I said in a weak voice.
I swear I saw it.
I don't know what else to call this,
Grant said.
Accusing people of murder? Those people are my neighbors, Spencer. Jesus Christ, are you taking your meds?
Yes, of course. I'm taking my meds. I'm doing everything the therapist says. Please don't kick me out, Grant. I can't afford a place yet. Please. I thought I was doing good. I thought it was the right thing to do.
Grant shook his head.
I can't do this right now. I'm dealing with a big pain in the ass merger at work. I'm going to bed. We'll talk about this tomorrow.
Grant, please, just shut the fuck up.
Grant snapped, walking away.
I knew it was a mistake letting you stay here.
I watched him walk up the stairs. A heaviness in my chest made it hard to breathe. I felt my senses folding back on themselves. The ragged edges of a panic attack closed in on me. My heart felt like it was skipping beats, and I felt certain I was going to die as I stood there in the entryway near the stairs. At first, the thought of dying terrified me, but as the panic attack took hold and I melted to the floor, I began to wish for death. I worked 2 part-time jobs. 5 days a week, 4 hours a day, I worked from home as a customer service representative for a website design and hosting company. 3 nights a week, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I cleaned a call center in a seedy part of downtown. It took me about 4 hours, cleaning from 7 to 11 those 3 nights per week. The day after I witnessed the murder was Wednesday. I worked my customer service shift, ate an early dinner, and got into my shitbox sedan to head for the cleaning job. The warehouse-turned-call center sat near a disused rail yard on a wide, industrial street lined with other warehouses. From the back windows of the call center, I could see, beyond a ragged chain-link fence, the rail yard. There were several moldering train cars sitting on the tracks, weeds grown up around their wheels. Further up, barely visible from the call center, was a long, low warehouse with busted-out windows and a rusting tin roof. Seeing that train yard always made me feel sad in a way I couldn't quite place. Despite this, or maybe because of it, I often took a few minutes to stare at the yard, trying to imagine it as it had been in its heyday, with employees and trains coming and going at all hours. Tonight, though, I wasn't in the mood to consider the ephemeral nature of life in the form of an abandoned train yard. The last thing I wanted to think about was death. I spared barely a glance out the back windows as I vacuumed the coarse industrial carpet around the cubicles. When I was done, I put the vacuum back into the cleaning supply closet and grabbed a bag for garbage collection. Most nights, I listened to music or a podcast while I worked, but I didn't feel like doing either tonight. I worked in silence, thinking about what I'd seen last night and how it would have been nearly impossible for the murderer to clean up everything so quickly. Unless he had help. That was the only thing that made sense. The couple in the house were in on it. Maybe the man was the murderer and the wife knew it. Maybe they had a secret room in their house where they had put the blonde lady before cleaning everything up. But the broken window? How could they replace a broken window so quickly? It didn't seem possible. I thought in circles as I gathered the trash around the call center. When I had emptied all the bins, I headed for the back door to take the bag out to the dumpster. The door had no built-in stop, so I nudged a piece of wood into place with my foot to keep it from closing on me. I had a key, but it only worked at the front door, so I would have to walk all the way around to get back in if it closed. The dumpster stood 20 yards to my left, in the middle of an alley made by the building on one side and the rail yard fence on the other. The heavy plastic lids were both down on the dumpster, which wasn't usually the case. It was something I noticed and dismissed just as quickly. I stopped in front of the dumpster and reached out with my left hand, lifting the lid. A scar-deformed face peered up out of the darkness inside the dumpster. It was the same face from last night, the same realistic mask. My mind reeled, and fear made time slow down. At first, I thought someone had discarded the mask in the dumpster. Then it moved, shooting up toward me. Black hands emerging, powerful hands, grabbing at me. I dropped both the trash bag and the lid, knowing that I should run. But it was too late. The lid bounced off the man's head as he grabbed me around the neck with his gloved hands. I grabbed his wrists, thinking he meant to kill me. A faint pop sounded from behind me, and a sharp pain erupted in my upper back. Struggling, I tried to free the man's hands, only thinking to bat at his face when weakness started to take over. This is what it's like to die, I thought. But it was strange. I could still breathe. Although his hands were around my neck, he wasn't choking me. It felt more like he was trying to hold me in place. My limbs grew heavy, and my awareness of the world dwindled down to a sharp point, then vanished to nothing, like water going down a drain.
Come on, Stan. Let's finish this up. My back is fucking killing me.
Two men were talking somewhere above me, somewhere in the darkness that I couldn't swim my way out of. My legs were up. Someone was holding onto my ankles. My back was on the ground, my arms stretched out above my head. I tried to move, but the signals got lost somewhere along the way. Panic scratched at the edges of my consciousness, like a swarm of starved rats coming through the walls of my coffin to devour my flesh. In my mind, I thrashed. My body remained limp, and my eyes remained closed.
Come on,
the first man said. Hands gripped my wrists. Something about that touch caused the signals to hit home. I thrashed in my mind again, and this time it worked. My eyes shot open as I yanked my hands out of the man's grip, dragging my fingernails down the insides of his wrists as I did.
Shit,
he said. He was dressed in black, wearing that scarred face mask.
What the fuck?
The man at my feet cried. I looked down, seeing that the other man was in the exact same outfit, same mask and everything. He kicked my feet, but the man held onto my ankles.
Hit him again!
I tried to yank my feet out of his grip. I tried to flip myself over, to get myself free any way I could, but the man at my feet fought me. Another pop sounded, and pain erupted in my chest. I looked down to see a dart sticking out of me. It had a fuzzy red end. It was a tranquilizer dart. I reached up and yanked it out, throwing it at the man at my feet. It bounced off his thick hoodie and fell to the floor of the cavernous dark room we were in. The world started going blurry again, the blackness closing in. My muscles relaxed involuntarily. I stopped thrashing and kicking.
How the fuck did he wake up?
The guy at my feet said.
I don't know. I thought one dart was supposed to put him out for 3 hours at least. Jesus, this is so fucked. Get his arms.
The guy grabbed my arms, and the two of them lifted me from the floor as I lost consciousness once again. The smell of death brought me back to the world with all the speed and ferocity of a kick to the teeth. I sat up, gasping, trying to open my eyes, only to realize that they were open. I just couldn't see anything. It was too dark wherever I was. My next realization came with a sickening dread. I was sticky. Something was all over me, all over my clothes, my hands, and my head. Even without seeing, I knew what it was, what it had to be. I could taste it. It was blood. I was covered in blood. The ground beneath me was uneven. I felt around in the dark, jerking my right hand away from a cool, sticky item that had to be a dead person's limb. Remembering that I had my phone with me when taking out the garbage, I patted my jeans and felt the slim rectangle there. I pulled it out, only vaguely aware that I was breathing fast and shallow. I hit the button on the side of the phone, waking the device up. Pale blue light shined out from the screen, illuminating a face that stared out of the darkness at me. It was a woman's face. I recognized it. It was the blonde woman I'd seen last night. She still had tape over her mouth, and her eyes were still full of fear. I thought she was alive until I shifted the phone and saw that her head was no longer attached to her body, which sat nearby. Shouting incoherently, I scrambled away into the darkness, kicking up dirt on the floor until I bumped into something behind me. The putrid smell of death seemed to attack my throat, making me gag as I turned around, shining the dim phone light on a rotting corpse. I scrambled away from the corpse. It was another woman, this one fully intact. I tried to get to my feet. Before I could stand to my full height, I slammed into the ceiling, which felt like it was made out of wood. Wincing, I crouched and fumbled with my phone until I got the flashlight on. I pointed the light back toward the blonde woman, seeing that there was another dead woman next to her, slightly fresher than the one I'd just bumped into. I spun the other way and saw two more dead women lying in the strange small room that was more like a crawl space. I didn't see an exit in either direction. The walls were concrete, the ceiling wooden, and I could see either end of the narrow, tunnel-like space. There were no doors.
No,
I said,
no, please let me out, please.
shining the light along the ceiling. I finally saw my way out. There were two metal hinges in the ceiling, denoting a trap door. I moved over and pushed up, not sure what I would do if the door was locked. But the door moved, opening into what felt like a much wider space, although I couldn't tell right away because of the darkness. I pulled myself out through the trapdoor and stood, shining the phone around. I was in a long wooden building that was familiar somehow. As I looked around, gathering my bearings and finding that I was alone in the place, I realized where I was. The train tracks gave it away. I was standing on a concrete platform in the train yard warehouse behind the call center. A pair of train tracks ran through the structure. The train tracks were flanked by two large wooden doors on either side. Back when the yard had been operational, I guessed trains would pull into the warehouse to be loaded with sensitive or expensive materials. I ran down toward a pedestrian door at one end. Bursting out into the night and seeing the call center in the distance, I couldn't help but break down. I fell to my knees and sobbed, thankful to be alive. But then I looked down at my hands and I remembered that I was covered in blood. I shined the light on myself, looking at the liquid staining my jeans and my shirt and my skin. At first, I thought I'd been targeted for murder because of what I'd seen last night. But as the clean night air helped push back the edges of panic, I realized those two men could have killed me easily if they wanted to. Which meant, what?
You're being set up,
I thought, again in my father's voice.
Isn't it obvious?
But I couldn't fathom why anyone would want to set me up for anything. With a shaking hand, I navigated to the phone function, bringing up the dial pad. I was going to call 911. I needed to tell them what had happened and about the dead women. But as I was dialing, doubt crept into my mind. I thought about how no one had believed me last night. What would happen if they didn't believe me this time?
At best, you'll be a suspect in the women's murders,
I thought.
At worst, you'll be charged with the murders and given the death penalty. I hear they're executing inmates with nitrogen gas now. How would you like to suffocate to death?
No, that was ridiculous. What about the drugs in my system? The police could test me and see that I had been drugged.
You could have drugged yourself, I thought, to make it seem like someone else had done it.
But surely the police will be able to see that I hadn't killed all those women. Surely I had been at work or with Grant when they had been killed.
You're thinking about this the wrong way,
my father's voice said in my head.
You need to think about why someone would want to set you up for these murders, and what else they would do to make it seem like you had done them.
I pictured the man staring at me through a crack in the curtains as I stood in front of his house with 3 cops.
I'm not crazy,
I said softly.
I know what I saw. I know what I heard.
There was no answer, only the distant hum of the highway and the faint buzz of the city. I deleted the numbers from the dial pad and then pocketed my phone. Then I stood up and hustled across the train yard, squeezing through a gap in the fence. The piece of wood I'd used to prop the back door of the call center was still there. I went inside, peering around for any sign of the 2 men. When it looked like I was alone in the building, I headed for the bathroom and washed my hands. As I was about to wash the blood off my face, the voice of reason piped up again.
If it's a setup, the cops will be on their way. It's time to go.
Knowing he was right, I headed out to my shitbox sedan and drove away. When I pulled onto the highway, I saw several police cars with their lights flashing coming the other way. They took the exit toward the call center and the train yard. I approached Grant's house slowly, half expecting to see police cars outside. Everything seemed normal, so I kept driving down the street, stopping the car down the road from the park and shutting the engine off. I couldn't see the house that was my destination because of the bend in the road. That was good. It meant they couldn't see me either. Unsure exactly what I would do when I got there, I decided to go prepared. I had a heavy Maglite knockoff in the trunk. I figured the flashlight would be better than using my phone. I could turn it on and off quicker, and it wasn't so awkward in my hand. I got out of the car and opened the trunk, jerking back and nearly crying out. There was another dead woman in the trunk. She'd been bound and gagged and stabbed to death. She was about as fresh as the blonde woman back at the train yard. Putting both hands to my mouth, I fought back an overwhelming urge to yell up at the stars. 6 women. 6 women had been brutally murdered by someone, maybe more than one person. And for what? Had they all been killed just to set me up? If so, why? I didn't have any enemies, at least not any that would do something so insane. The age of the rotting corpses back at the train yard made me think this hadn't been done just for me. I was just the patsy that had been selected to take the fall. A fierce and unflinching anger expanded in my chest, pushing back, only slightly, the unceasing panic I'd been experiencing since my capture at the dumpster. And that anger only intensified as I looked down and saw a tranquilizer pistol next to the woman's body. Behind her, at the back of the truck, was a collection of supplies: duct tape, flex cuffs, a knife, a clear plastic box with 3 tranquilizer darts, and a hacksaw. Both the knife and the hacksaw were bloody.
The cops never would have believed you,
my long-dead father said in my head.
Not with all this evidence. I bet your prints are on the knife and the hacksaw. Whoever did this went all out.
I grimaced, anger beating back the panic, clearing my mind, giving me a clearly defined goal. I grabbed the supplies I thought I would need, shoving most of them into the backpack I always took to work with me. When I had everything, I shut the trunk quietly and walked down the road. This time, I didn't think about what the people in the great big houses would think if they saw me. I didn't care. All I cared about was getting some answers, and I knew I would find them in the house next to the park. Doubt started to creep in after I'd spent 10 minutes looking for a way into the slumbering house. All the windows were locked. The front and back doors were similarly bolted. The panic was squirming its way back in, beating back the anger. The thought of just getting into my car and driving away was suddenly an attractive one. As I stared up at the back of the house, the anger was all but forgotten. Shaking my head, I turned to leave. But I immediately felt something hard roll under my shoe in the soft grass. I paused, moving my foot to look down. There was a faint glimmer from the half moon overhead. Crouching, I parted the grass and saw a small, jagged piece of glass, about the size of a dime, but twice as thick. I picked up the piece and then turned to look up at the first floor window. The anger came screaming back. Dropping the piece of glass, I stood up and pulled the tranquilizer pistol out of my back waistband. I reversed the thing and smashed its butt into the window pane, shattering the glass. Moving with a quickness fueled by fury, I broke out the rest of the window and climbed into the house. My backpack caught briefly on a small remaining shard, but I yanked it, breaking the shard off. I could hear running from upstairs. A woman's frightened voice sounded, answered by a man's gruff and dismissive tone. Knowing I had little time to waste, I ran through the immaculate and potpourri-smelling house, heading directly for the source of the footsteps. The man I'd seen the night before had just reached the bottom of the staircase as I rounded the corner from a den. He had a pistol in his hand, which he raised and pointed at me as I barreled toward him. He pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. No bang, no click, nothing.
Shit!
The man said, turning the gun to find the safety. I still had the reversed tranquilizer gun in my hand, and I smacked him in the face with the butt. He crumpled against the staircase. At the top of the stairs, the red-headed woman looked down and screamed. I transferred the tranq gun to my left hand, while yanking the pistol away from the dazed man. I then pointed the gun up at the woman. She stopped screaming, but clutched her midriff and said,
Please, don't kill us! Why are you setting me up?
I shouted, stepping back while pointing the gun at the man.
We're not!
The woman said.
I don't even know you! You're fucking crazy!
The man said, coming back around.
We didn't do anything to you! Stan, don't antagonize him!
The woman said. That name triggered a tripwire in my brain. Stan. Stan. I had heard that name recently. When? There was a light switch at the wall nearby. I stepped over and flipped it, illuminating the area. I looked down at Stan and said,
Show me your wrists. What?
He asked.
What the hell are you talking about? The insides of your wrists,
I said, thrusting the pistol toward him.
Now!
Stan turned his hands. There were faint scratches on the insides of his wrists. Scratches I had put there when he and another man were carrying me to the rail yard warehouse.
I don't get it,
Stan said, looking up at me.
We put enough drugs into you to keep you out for the whole night. Why?
I asked, shoving the pistol into his left eye socket and thumbing the safety off.
Why me? Listen, I was just doing what I was told.
There was a pleading in his voice. His tough guy front had disintegrated.
He paid us $2 million to set you up. Who paid you? Conrad Carrasco,
the man said.
Who the hell is that? You don't know who Conrad Carrasco is? He's a multi-millionaire, but about to be a billionaire once the merger goes through. You know how much money $1 billion is? You could spend $1,000 a day for 2,000 years and you would still be filthy rich.
He was ranting, the fear getting the better of him.
Why?
I said, growing more frustrated with every word that came out of this man's mouth.
Why is he doing this?
Stan laughed hysterically.
Are you dumb? He's a fucking serial killer. That's why he's doing it. He kills hookers. The cops are getting too close and he needs a fall guy. You're it.
I shook my head and looked up at the top of the stairs. The woman was gone.
You're lying,
I said.
I should kill you right now. No,
he cried.
I'm not lying. I swear to God himself, I'm not lying. Listen, I'll tell you where he lives. I'll tell you. He's the one you want, not me. I'm just a guy who works for him, that's all. He owns me. He owns everything. Even this fucking house. He owns it all. He has dirt on me. That's the only reason I agreed to help set you up. Well, that and the money.
He laughed his hysterical laugh again, but I shut him up by shoving the gun harder into his eye.
I swear,
he cried.
I'll tell you where to find him if you leave us alone.
I glanced back up the stairs, expecting the woman to show up with a gun at any moment, or maybe she was calling the cops.
Fine,
I said.
What's his address?
I had driven past Conrad Carrasco's house several times without knowing it. It took up a huge portion of land and was surrounded by high stone walls that I had always assumed belonged to some kind of country club or golf course. I drove past the front gate, seeing that there was a gatehouse with a guard sitting inside. Once I was down the road, I stopped the car and thought about how I should go about getting into the place. I cursed myself for not recording what Stan had said. The evidence was still piled against me, so I had to get onto the lavish property and find something that could clear my name. Thinking too long about it would only allow time for the panic nipping at the edges of my consciousness to come back with full force. I couldn't let that happen. I had to act while rage was still fueling me. So I got out of the car, taking my backpack with my supplies in it. I was still covered in now dry blood from the blonde woman, but I planned to use it to my advantage. With both the tranq gun and Stan's pistol on me, I walked down the road, headed for the front gate. "What if Stan called to warn him?" my father's voice asked from the depths of my mind. "What if he knows you're coming?" Stopping on the sidewalk, I considered this possibility, but only briefly. Movement was the key. It wasn't like I had a choice anyway. It was either this or go to prison for the rest of my life. Sure, I could accuse Carrasco of setting me up, but who would believe me? Even if someone did, how could I go up against all that money? There would be no incentive to arrest the guy. That would be upsetting the apple cart. Hell, he probably knew the district attorney personally. They probably played golf together. Surely Stan and his wife would insist that they had never told me any such thing. Or maybe they would disappear so they couldn't speak ever again. I resumed walking, determined to end this now, tonight. As I rounded the corner onto the driveway that led up to the gate, I broke into a run.
Help!
I screamed.
Please, help!
It was the moment of truth. If the guard was expecting me, I would be in trouble. But if he wasn't, my plan might just work. The guy, who looked like a retired cop wearing a blue blazer over a white shirt and tie, stepped out of the guard shack and looked toward me with one hand on the pistol in his holster.
Please, you gotta help me. My wife, she's bleeding. Jesus Christ, man,
the guard said, looking at my bloody clothes and the lights from the top of the gate posts.
Please,
I said, getting closer, reaching behind my back. I whipped the tranq gun out when I was still 5 yards away. The guard jerked back and pulled on his gun, but he hadn't moved the leather strap over the gun out of the way. I pulled the trigger. The dart shot out with a faint pop and stuck into the man's chest. He looked down at it in surprise, thumbing the leather holster strap out of the way as he did. But I was already moving, dropping the tranq gun and lunging for the man. I caught his wrist before he could get the gun up, and I pushed him back through the door of the gatehouse. He tripped over the threshold and we hit the floor of the small shack. He fought with me for a few moments before the drugs took effect and he passed out. I put his gun in my backpack and found the button to open the gate. Then I strolled up the driveway toward the massive 3-story house. I held Stan's pistol in my hand, safety off, ready to go. Approaching the house, I noticed cameras everywhere, but that didn't slow my pace. I strolled right up to the ornate wooden front door and grabbed the latch with my left hand. The door opened. I guessed rich people who were protected by giant walls and a gate guard didn't lock their doors. Moving through the open door slowly, I stepped into a wide entryway. I couldn't have told you the name of the style, but it looked to me like a strange mix of Italian and modern decoration. A marble-topped table in the middle of the entryway had a vase with fresh roses in it. To my immediate left, stairs went up to the second floor and down to what had to be the basement. A second-floor railing overlooked the entryway, and a stout man with a pistol suddenly appeared there. Without a moment to think, I lifted my pistol and fired at him. At the same instant, he fired down at me. I rushed forward, shooting crazily. I felt something tug at my blood-stained shirt. Sliding on my knees toward the marble-top table, I fired twice more before I was under the cover of the table. The gunshots from above kept up, but they were hitting far behind me, whizzing as the bullets careened off the fancy floor. Then they stopped. I saw something clatter to the floor beneath the railing. It was a pistol, and it had blood on it. I scooted from under the table and peeked up at the railing, but I saw no one. So I scrambled out and ran up the stairs, leading with the pistol. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw the man who'd been shooting at me. He had retreated into the connecting hallway and collapsed against a wall. The middle and ring fingers of his right hand were gone. They were taken off by one of my shots. He stared at the injured hand like he couldn't comprehend what had happened. Then I saw he was bleeding from elsewhere, the blood soaking the plush carpet underneath him. I'd hit him somewhere else. I couldn't tell exactly where because of his dark clothes. Pointing the gun at him, I approached warily. But before I got to him, another man came screaming out of a nearby doorway, holding some sort of angel statue in his hands. The pointy bronze angel wings looked like twin knives. He had a round face that was red with rage and effort. A smattering of gray hair dotted his scalp. He was dressed in a set of shimmering blood-red silk pajamas. I figured this man had to be Conrad Carrasco. Before I could pivot to get the gun on him, he threw the statue at me. The heavy item smashed into the back of my right hand, and I lost my grip on the gun, which bounced on the carpet and came to rest a couple of feet away. The statue fell at my feet. I turned and lunged for the gun, but the screaming, round-faced man grabbed the back of my shirt and pulled me toward him. For a small man, he was very strong. I fell back and ended up on the gunman's lap. He groaned in pain as I hit him. Then he reached out with his good hand and grabbed at my face while Carrasco ran for the pistol. But the gunman was weak, and I jerked away from him with relative ease. I thought about the gun in my backpack, the one I'd taken from the gate guard, but I dismissed the thought immediately. There was no time. I knew I wouldn't get to the gun before Carrasco, so I scrambled on all fours, grabbing the angel statue. The wings of the female angel pointed out from its back in a V, and I turned the heavy metal item so they were aimed at Carrasco, who was presently turning, pistol in hand. I lunged to my feet, thrusting the statue out, jamming the wings into Carrasco's chest as he fired the pistol. We stumbled away from each other. As I pulled the wings out of his chest, Carrasco dropped the pistol. We stood there, just feet away from each other, each lost in the aftershock of violence. After staring at me for a moment, Carrasco looked down and lifted his shirt. Blood welled from the twin slits, slowly at first, then coming with a shocking ferocity. I dropped the statue and lifted my shirt, seeing a bullet hole low on the left side of my abdomen. It didn't bleed much. I didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Looking up, I met Carrasco's eyes. He was shocked and appalled.
No!
He said, turning and stumbling toward the stairs, gripping the wounds.
No!
He cried, sounding like a spoiled child. When he reached the stairs, he lost his footing and fell, crashing down the steps. I heard nothing more from him after that. Knowing I didn't have much time, I moved back over to the dying gunman.
Hey,
I said, slapping his face. His eyes fluttered open.
where did he do the killing? Are there any other bodies? Where's the evidence?
He peered around as if looking for Carrasco.
He's dead,
I said.
He's dead, but you have a chance to make this right. Where should the police look? I don't know,
He said.
I picked the call girls up and dropped them off here, but I didn't know what he was doing, not until a month ago, when he came to me for help. Said he'd have my wife killed if I didn't help him shift the blame.
I suddenly realized that this was the second man who'd helped knock me out and carry me to the train yard warehouse.
Where?
I asked again.
There's a secret door in the basement, in the laundry room. It's in the wall behind the white shelf. It's all there. Look in there.
I nodded, but I wasn't done.
Why me?
I asked.
Why did you pick me?
The guy's eyelids closed and then opened again slowly.
Your cousin. He helped. Grant?
I asked, not believing. The guy nodded.
Carrasco was going to pay him $2 million. My cousin works at a private equity firm,
I said. Then I remembered that Grant had been talking about a merger. Stan had mentioned something about a merger as well. I guessed Carrasco owned the firm. I slumped down next to the guy, whose eyes were now closed, and I pulled out my phone. Now, I had no qualms about dialing 911. The hidden room in the basement had all the evidence the authorities could ever want. But to make things even easier, Grant spilled his guts soon after he was arrested. He told them everything. The plan had been to get me on the police's radar with the little ruse in the park, thinking it would be seen later as a cry for help. Then, when the anonymous tip came in from someone saying they had seen me putting a woman's body in my trunk at the call center, it wouldn't come out of left field. Stan and his wife were caught 2 states over when they tried to pull a large sum of money out of their bank account. With their confession, the police filled in the holes of the story. As it turned out, the woman in the park hadn't actually been killed then. They only made it look like she had, for fear of leaving blood behind. They had knocked her out and dragged her back into the house, hiding her in a tiny room behind a wall that had been built for that purpose. That was why the cops never found her. Once things had died down, they brought the woman back over to Carrasco's place, where he killed her and cut her up, saving much of her blood to dump over my unconscious body at the train yard warehouse. With all the evidence planted and all my DNA at the rail yard warehouse, it would have been an open and shut case. All the women who'd been dumped in the warehouse had disappeared in a time frame that would have made it impossible for me to have an alibi. It usually happened when I was working alone at the call center. They knew I couldn't afford a good lawyer, and any talk of a conspiracy to set me up would be seen as an attempt to shift the blame. Plus, there was a matter of my past behavior. I'd been diagnosed with paranoid personality disorder after being arrested for attacking a man I thought had been following me. I'd spent a year in jail and then got into court-appointed therapy. Strangely enough, what had made me an ideal patsy also saved my ass. The medication I was on had prevented the tranquilizer they'd used on me from having its full effect. That's why I had awoken once while they were carrying me into the warehouse, and again before the cops could show up to search my car. I'm still in the hospital, recovering from the gunshot wound to my abdomen. But I've had lots of visits from the press, and just yesterday, a Hollywood producer came to visit me. She wants to buy the rights to my story. She says it will make a great movie, and you won't believe how much she's offering. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.